The sweet scent of fresh sawdust filled the air as Lucas Thompson's calloused hands guided a piece of maple through his workshop's band saw. Afternoon sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the weathered wooden floor of his small shop in downtown Millbrook. At first glance, no one would guess that the man in the faded flannel shirt and worn jeans was anything more than what he appeared, a humble small-town carpenter. Lucas paused to wipe sweat from his brow with a threadbare handkerchief, his steel-grey eyes focused on the intricate detail work before him. His workshop, a converted 19th-century storefront with peeling paint and a creaky floor, looked exactly as you'd expect tools organized meticulously on pegboards, half-finished projects carefully arranged on sturdy workbenches, and the ever-present layer of sawdust coating every surface. Just a moment he called out as the bell above the door chimed, signaling a customer's arrival. But before stepping away from his workbench, Lucas glanced at the inconspicuous smartwatch partially hidden beneath his sleeve. A notification flashed: urgent, Thompson tech stocks up 12%, board meeting in 15 minutes. With practiced ease, Lucas slipped into the small office at the back of his workshop, a space that appeared as modest as the rest of the building save for one detail. Behind a false panel in his filing cabinet, a state-of-the-art laptop hummed quietly, displaying multiple screens of real-time market data and company reports. In this hidden corner of his world, Lucas Thompson wasn't just a carpenter, he was the founder and CEO of Thompson Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar tech empire he ran entirely remotely. His fingers flew across the keyboard, approving a major acquisition in Singapore and reviewing quarterly projections that would make most Wall Street executives sweat. To his board members appearing in perfectly framed video windows, he was sitting in what appeared to be a sophisticated office thanks to a carefully curated virtual background. None of them knew their brilliant CEO was actually conducting business from a dusty carpenter's workshop in a town so small it barely appeared on maps. The corner of Lucas's mouth twitched upward as he remembered his executive assistant's latest plea for him to at least consider a proper office, but this was exactly where he wanted to be. In a world obsessed with status and appearance, he had chosen something different: a life of purpose, craftsmanship, and genuine connections, even if it meant being seen as the town's struggling carpenter. As he wrapped up the meeting, the bell chimed again. Lucas quickly secured his hidden tech sanctuary and returned to his public persona, ready to greet another customer who had no idea they were about to get furniture crafted by the hands of a billionaire. Lucas Thompson hadn't always lived a double life. 10 years ago, he'd been the face of Silicon Valley's newest wonder kid, plastered across tech magazines and business journals after Thompson Technologies' revolutionary AI architecture transformed the industry. The company's IPO had made him a billionaire at 28, but it had also shown him the hollow nature of wealth-based relationships. At his lowest point, surrounded by sycophants and false friends in his sleek San Francisco penthouse, Lucas had remembered his grandfather's workshop. The old man had taught him woodworking during childhood summers, explaining that true wealth lay in creating something meaningful with your own hands. One morning, Lucas had shocked his board of directors by announcing he would be managing the company remotely. He'd disappeared from the tech social scene, bought his grandfather's old workshop in Millbrook, and never looked back. Now, at 38, his hands bore the calluses of honest work, and his designer suits gathered dust in a closet he rarely opened. The townspeople knew him as the quiet carpenter who charged fair prices and sometimes accepted homemade pies as payment from elderly clients who reminded him of his grandmother. They whispered about his struggle to make ends meet, noting his modest lifestyle and the way he drove an old pickup truck that had seen better days. Mr. Thompson, a voice pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah Chen stood in his workshop's doorway, sunlight catching the streak of premature grey in her dark hair, earned from years of stretching community center budgets and fighting for grants. "Do you have a moment?" Sarah had arrived in Millbrook 3 years ago to take over the struggling community center, armed with a master's degree in social work and an unwavering determination to make a difference. Lucas had watched her transform the center from a neglected building into a vibrant hub for after-school programs, senior activities, and job training workshops. She reminded him of himself in the early days of Thompson Technologies, passionate, driven, and more concerned with impact than income. "Always for you, MS," Chen, Lucas replied, setting down his chisel. He noticed the worry lines around her eyes had deepened since her last visit. Please, it's Sarah. She managed a tired smile. And I wish this was a social call, but the center's heating system is acting up again. I know times are tough for everyone, especially small business owners like yourself, but you're the only carpenter in town who... Lucas suppressed a smile at being called a struggling small business owner. Just that morning, he'd authorized a $50 million research grant, but here was Sarah, carefully trying to negotiate what she assumed would be a financial burden for him. Around town, Lucas had heard the concerned murmurs about poor Mr. Thompson working too hard for too little. Mrs. Davis at the diner regularly slipped extra portions onto his plate, insisting he was too thin. Mr. Peterson, the hardware store owner, often found extra supplies that he claimed would just go to waste anyway. Their genuine care meant more to him than all the business awards gathering dust in a storage unit in San Francisco. The town's perception of him as the struggling carpenter had created something he'd never found in his wealthy circles: authentic human connections based on character rather than bank account balances. It was a richness that couldn't be measured in dollars, and one he guarded more carefully than his billions. The boilers completely shot, Lucas announced, emerging from the community center's basement. Sarah's face fell as she processed the news, her fingers unconsciously twisting the worn silver ring she always wore. The late autumn chill already permeated the building, and winter was fast approaching. "How bad is the damage to your budget?" she asked, careful to maintain her professional composure. Lucas felt a familiar tug at his heart, the urge to reveal his true identity and solve her problems with a single phone call. "Let me worry about that," he replied instead, pulling out a battered notebook. "I can start the work tomorrow. The kids need heat for their after-school programs." Over the next few weeks, Lucas found himself spending more time at the community center than his own workshop. He learned about Sarah's childhood in a struggling immigrant family, how education had changed her life, and her dream of providing the same opportunity to others. She, in turn, discovered his gift for helping the center's teenagers with their math homework, though she assumed his skills came from calculating construction measurements rather than developing advanced algorithms. Their easy friendship developed through shared lunches and late evening conversations after the center cleared out. Lucas found himself sharing edited versions of his past, keeping the billions hidden but maintaining the core truths about his desire to create meaningful change in the world. But their bubble of contentment burst one cold November morning when the Millbrook Gazette's headline screamed major developer plans to revitalize downtown. Sarah burst into Lucas's workshop, newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. "Sterling Development Corporation," she read, voice shaking. "They're planning to buy out the entire downtown area. Luxury condos, high-end retail spaces. They're calling it economic progress." Lucas's blood ran cold. He knew Sterling Development well. Their CEO had tried to partner with Thompson Technologies multiple times. Their business model was simple: buy out struggling small towns, force out local businesses, and transform communities into soulless upscale developments. Over the next month, Millbrook's mood darkened as Sterling's representatives descended upon the town. They offered generous buyouts that somehow always fell short of what business owners would need to restart elsewhere. The hardware store, the diner, even Lucas's workshop all received visits from smooth-talking agents in expensive suits. They offered the center half its market value, Sarah confided one evening, her usual optimism cracking. "Said they're doing us a favor since the building needs so many repairs. They know we can't afford to fix everything up to code." Lucas watched his beloved town struggling to resist Sterling's pressure tactics. Mr. Peterson had started drinking his coffee black to save money for legal fees. Mrs. Davis's usual cheerful greetings had been replaced by worried frowns as her diner's customers dwindled, scared off by Sterling's aggressive health inspection visits. The development corporation's tactics were familiar to Lucas. He'd seen them countless times in board meetings and investment presentations. They were bleeding the town slowly, knowing that eventually desperation would force people to accept their terms. Sarah organized town meetings, reached out to state representatives, and even attempted to secure historical protection for some buildings. But Sterling's lawyers found loopholes faster than the town could close them. "Sometimes I wish a miracle would happen," Sarah admitted one night as they sat on the center's steps, watching the sunset paint the town's struggling storefronts in deceptively cheerful colors. "Some mysterious benefactor who could help us fight back." Lucas felt the weight of his secret identity like a physical burden. With a single phone call, he could mobilize enough resources to bury Sterling in litigation. With one press release, Thompson Technologies could announce a new satellite office in Millbrook, making the town suddenly too valuable for Sterling to strong-arm. But as he watched Sarah wipe away frustrated tears, he realized that simply throwing money at the problem would rob the town of something precious, their chance to fight for their community on their own terms. Yet, the sight of her usual determination crumbling under the weight of corporate greed made his carefully constructed double life feel suddenly selfish. "We'll find a way," he promised, knowing he would have to find a balance between protecting his secret and protecting his town. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Sarah gave him a grateful but skeptical look. From where? The poor carpenter who can barely keep his own workshop running. Her words, though spoken without malice, hit Lucas like a physical blow. For the first time since choosing this simple life, he wondered if he had taken his deception too far. The eviction notice arrived on a bitter December morning, its official letterhead stark against the community center's worn welcome desk. Sarah's hands trembled as she read it aloud to Lucas: 30 days to vacate the premises. Sterling Development had acquired the building through a series of complex property transfers and loan purchases. "We can't let them do this," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "These kids have nowhere else to go after school. Mrs. Rodriguez depends on our senior programs, and the job training workshop, we have 15 people about to complete their certifications." Lucas watched her pace the empty community room, the space where he'd spent countless hours helping teenagers with math problems while secretly running a tech empire from his phone. His secret identity had never felt more like a betrayal than at this moment. That evening, an emergency town meeting packed Millbrook's small city hall. Lucas stood in the back, watching familiar faces crumple with despair as they learned the community center wasn't the only casualty. Sterling Development had acquired enough properties to force through their revitalization plan. "My family's run that hardware store for 3 generations," Mr. Peterson's voice cracked. "Where are people supposed to get their supplies now? The nearest Home Depot is 40 miles away." Mrs. Davis stood next, tears streaming down her face. "The diner was my mother's dream. We survived 2 recessions and a flood. Now some corporation can just take it away." Sarah approached the podium last, her professional demeanor barely masking her devastation. "The community center has served Millbrook for over 50 years. We've helped countless families, provided safe spaces for our youth, and supported our seniors. If we lose this, we lose the heart of our community." Lucas felt the weight of his Thompson Technologies credentials in his wallet, knowing a single business card could change everything. His finger hovered over his phone, tempted to call his legal team. Yet he hesitated, remembering why he'd chosen this life in the first place. In Silicon Valley, he'd watched communities torn apart by sudden wealth, seen how external salvation often destroyed the very things that made a place special. But watching Sarah fight back tears as she outlined their dwindling options, he wondered if his philosophical stance was worth the pain it caused. "We have 1 week to raise enough money for legal representation," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "I know times are tough for everyone, but if we could each contribute something." Lucas watched as elderly residents on fixed incomes offered their savings, as struggling parents promised portions of their Christmas funds. His chest tightened as Mr. Peterson pledged his veteran's pension, and Mrs. Davis offered the money she'd saved for her daughter's wedding. "I can offer my carpentry services for free," Lucas heard himself say, knowing how hollow the gesture felt given his hidden resources. "Maybe we can auction off some custom furniture pieces." Sarah's grateful smile felt like a knife to his heart. Here was a community willing to sacrifice everything to save itself, while he sat on billions, hiding behind principles that suddenly seemed selfish. As the meeting dispersed, Lucas overheard 2 teenagers who frequented the center's after-school program. "Maybe we could sell hot chocolate or something," one suggested. "I've got $5 saved up we could use for supplies." Their innocent determination broke something in Lucas. He had chosen to live simply to find authentic connections, but in doing so, had he betrayed the very people who had given him what he sought? As he watched Sarah lock up the community center that night, possibly for one of the last times, the weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical burden. The news broke during breakfast at Mrs. Davis's diner. An anonymous donor had purchased and forgiven the mortgages of 6 downtown businesses, including the hardware store and the diner itself. By lunch, word spread that Sterling Development's local property acquisitions had been blocked by a mysterious holding company. "It has to be someone who knows the town," Mrs. Davis declared, serving free coffee to celebrate. The donations targeted exactly the businesses Sterling was pressuring most. Sarah burst into Lucas's workshop, clutching the local paper. "Have you heard? Someone's fighting back against Sterling." Her excitement dimmed as she noticed his tense posture. "Lucas? What's wrong?" But Lucas barely heard her. He was frantically checking his phone, having just learned his executive assistant had failed to properly obscure Thompson Technologies' involvement in the property purchases. Any competent investigator could now trace the shell company back to him. Sarah's gasp made him look up. She stood frozen, staring at his laptop screen, visible through his partially open office door. Multiple windows displayed Thompson Technologies' internal systems, his email signature clear at the bottom of an open message: Lucas Thompson, CEO and founder. "Sarah, I can explain," he started, but she was already backing away. "All this time," she whispered, "while we were scraping together donations, holding bake sales, watching people empty their savings," her voice hardened. "You just sat there, pretending to be one of us." "I wasn't pretending," Lucas protested. "Everything about our friendship, about who I am as a person, that's all real." Real? Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You watched me stress over every repair bill, listened to me worry about program cuts. I trusted you with my fears, my hopes for this community. Was that entertaining for you, watching us struggle while you could solve everything with a phone call?" "That's not." "Ew. Did you know about Sterling before they came? With your resources you must have. Were you ever going to warn us?" Lucas felt each question like a blow. "I wanted to help in a way that wouldn't change the town's character. Money changes people, changes communities. I've seen it happen." "So you decided to play God? Determine how much we should struggle before you swooped in to save us?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Do you know what that kind of money could have done for our programs? How many kids we could have helped?" "Sarah, please." "I have to go," she cut him off. "The community center board meets in an hour. I suppose I should expect another anonymous miracle to save us? Or will you let us close to maintain your social experiment?" She slammed the door behind her, leaving Lucas alone in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and wood shavings of his carefully constructed simple life that suddenly felt more fraudulent than authentic. The emergency town hall meeting buzzed with tension as Lucas stepped onto the podium. Gone were his worn flannel and work boots, replaced by a simple but clearly expensive suit. The room fell silent. "Most of you know me as the carpenter who works downtown. Today I need to tell you who I really am." He took a deep breath. "I'm the founder and CEO of Thompson Technologies. And yes, I'm the anonymous donor who's been helping the town." The silence erupted into chaos. In the back, Sarah stood with arms crossed, watching. 10 years ago, I had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered," Lucas continued once the noise settled. "I watched wealth destroy communities, turn neighbors against each other, replace genuine connections with artificial ones. So I chose a different path. Here in Millbrook, I found what billions couldn't buy: real friendships, purpose, and a community that cared about character over capital." He turned to Sarah. "I was wrong to withhold help when I could have prevented so much stress and pain. I was so focused on preserving authenticity that I forgot authenticity includes honesty. I'm sorry." Sarah's expression softened slightly as Lucas addressed the town again. "I'm not here to buy Millbrook or change it. I'm here to protect what makes it special. But this time I want to do it openly, working together with all of you." Over the next hour, Lucas laid out a proposal, a community-led development plan that would preserve Millbrook's character while providing needed updates. The community center would be renovated, not replaced. Local businesses would receive support to modernize while maintaining their independence. Most importantly, all decisions would require community approval. "We don't need your charity," Mr. Peterson spoke up, but his tone was thoughtful rather than angry. "But we could use a neighbor who brings both carpentry skills and business experience to the table." Mrs. Davis nodded. "You've proved yourself as a community member first, Lucas. The money, that's secondary to who you are to us." Gradually, the room's atmosphere shifted from shock to cautious optimism. Lucas noticed Sarah approaching the podium, her expression unreadable. "Trust is earned," she said quietly, "both as a billionaire and as a carpenter. Maybe it's time to earn it as both." 6 months later, the community center hummed with activity. Sarah and Lucas co-chaired the town's development committee, her social work expertise balancing his business acumen. He still worked in his workshop, though now everyone knew the furniture's true value. Some days, tech executives would arrive for meetings to find their CEO in sawdust-covered clothes, teaching local teens both coding and carpentry. "You know," Sarah mentioned one evening as they reviewed community center expansion plans, "sometimes the simplest solution is just being yourself." Lucas smiled, noting how she now wore her worry lines less frequently. "Turns out I needed Millbrook more than it needed a billionaire's help."
1 year later, the once quiet and unassuming town of Maplewood had blossomed into a vibrant and tightly knit community. The transformation was palpable, not just in its appearance, but in the spirit of its people. Lucas, the town's reluctant hero, remained steadfast in his simple lifestyle despite the changes and the growing recognition of his influence. The streets of Maplewood were now bustling with small businesses, each one nurtured by a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. The town square, once sparsely populated, had become a hub for farmers' markets, community events, and impromptu gatherings. Everywhere you looked, there was a tangible sense of connection and joy, the kind that can only come from a shared journey of growth and understanding. Lucas had stayed true to his humble ways, continuing to tend to his modest garden and living in his small, cozy home at the edge of town. While others admired his wisdom and authenticity, he shied away from the spotlight, content with watching the town flourish from a quiet distance. His actions had inspired others to embrace a more meaningful and connected way of living, prioritizing relationships over material wealth. In the final scene, a warm golden sunset bathed the town in a soft glow as families and friends gathered at the town square for a celebratory evening. Children laughed as they played, and the air buzzed with the sound of heartfelt conversations and shared stories. Lucas stood at the edge of the crowd, his face serene, a gentle smile reflecting his inner peace. Though he remained on the periphery, his presence was deeply felt by everyone there. His simple, authentic life had become a beacon of hope and a reminder of what truly mattered. The story of Maplewood and its transformation was not about grand achievements or dramatic events. It was about the power of authenticity, of staying true to oneself, and fostering genuine connections. Lucas's journey taught the town and perhaps the world that true wealth is not measured in possessions or status, but in the depth of our relationships and the strength of our community. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucas turned to walk back to his home. His heart was full, knowing that the seeds of change he had planted had grown into a thriving, compassionate community. The legacy of his quiet authenticity would endure, reminding future generations of the beauty of a life well lived.